Hello everyone and welcome to At the Cap Table podcast, a new series that shines the spotlight on the investors who are changing the VC industry in Europe. I'm your host, Sarah Finnegan. Our next guest is Judith Dada, General Partner at La Famiglia. La Famiglia is a Berlin-based European seed stage venture capital fund that invests in B2B tech companies, disrupting or enabling large industries. Earlier this year, La Famiglia raised $250 million for its combined third seed fund. Judith's focus areas include the future of work, data-driven business models, and machine learning. In addition to this, she serves as an advisor to the German government on topics like technology, diversity, and migration matters. Before joining La Famiglia, Judith was at Facebook, where she managed Amazon's Europe's marketing strategy and worked on Facebook's VC initiative. In this episode of At the Cap Table, Judith will be sharing her insights and experiences in a dynamic and wide-reaching discussion. The topics covered will include Judith's background and personal journey into investing, including a route into VC, the current state of entrepreneurship into the DACH region and Europe given the abundance of talent moving into the space, building and strengthening a strong ecosystem in Europe, La Familia's investment focus, and a quick fire round of final and probing questions. Stay tuned for an engaging and informative conversation.
And now, some words from our beloved sponsors. Tactic is the leading forecasting and scenario planning software for venture capital funds. Tactic combines portfolio construction, portfolio management, forecasting, and reporting into a unified platform. Investors are empowered with data-driven insights on fund strategy, reserve allocation, exit planning, and fund performance. Tactic was built using quantitative techniques researched from hundreds of data-driven fund managers and is trusted by over 250 funds globally today. Tactic is a proud sponsor of the first season of the At the Cap Table podcast series. If you'd like to learn more, please check out tactic.io, tactyc.io. Investors are turning to new relationships as we continue to face challenges in a downturn. Join Expand North Star to discover Dubai, the UAE, and the rise of the Global South ecosystems. Gain insights on market access opportunities and the latest on ADGM, Mubadala, and Catalyst Partners, as well as how DFDF are transforming the global investment landscape with a $1 billion target for assets under management by the end of 2024. You'll connect with the people driving the UAE's digital economy to grow more than $140 billion in 2031. And Dubai's recently announced ambitious $8.7 trillion economy agenda for the next decade, known as D33. Register now at expandnorthstar.com/EUVC.
Judith, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. It is an enormous pleasure having you on and super excited to speak to you and dive into a few topics.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Thank you. So Judith, you are General Partner at La Famiglia, a European seed stage venture capital fund. You're joining us from Berlin, where you're based, one of Europe's top tech hubs. And speaking of Berlin, I believe our paths crossed there when I was working there last year and the year before.
Indeed. I still remember. I think I bumped into you somewhere in Kreuzberg, the tech hub of Berlin, basically.
Awesome. From, I guess, our time in Berlin, I really observed how prominent you were and are in the venture ecosystem there. I think you're really, really entrenched not only in the tech ecosystem, but also quite prominent and vocal at major events and conferences across Europe. I think to start us off, let's go back a little earlier in your career. Prior to La Famiglia, you were at Facebook managing the VC initiative there. And prior to that, you managed Amazon's European marketing strategy. But I guess maybe you could kick us off with some of your background.
Happy to. So, I don't have the kind of straightforward, I worked in private equity or consulting or banking before joining VC type of background. I would say I did a little bit of everything and nothing at the same time. Actually, originally very fascinated by everything that's social science. So started out studying for a social science degree with some economics and management mixed in. Then very quickly realized that especially the kind of more quantitative side of social science was the most fascinating side of my studies. And so focused much more on kind of advanced statistics. And then also for my master's, kind of changed gear a little bit and focused much more on kind of technology management and, kind of computational social science. So really kind of mixing computer science with social science, always trying to ask social science questions, like always asking, how does technology actually in the end affect people? I was super interested in studying social networks like Facebook and Instagram back in the day. I was like trawling lots of data from the web and then trying to analyze how kind of networks form and how information, how power propagates within those networks. But that was really, kind of a little bit of everything and nothing. And then after finishing my master's degree, I was briefly considering doing a PhD in machine learning and was, I think I was kind of the classic, Nigerian kind of immigrant father. It's always great to have a PhD, to have kind of a doctor in the family. So I was kind of mentally going down that track. But then in the end, decided against it. I think I'm a very social human being, and kind of 4 years of me and my research would have been a very lonely experience. And so instead, I joined Facebook because I had done so much research with the Facebook and Instagram API. I thought it was a really fascinating company. And because, of my kind of wild background of different things, I joined the sales team, which is a fairly, I think, generalistic, side of things to start with. It was based in the European headquarters in Dublin, loved Ireland, loved my time there. And because of kind of, my data background, I've been very quickly got handed responsibility for one of the global or like biggest accounts at Facebook, which is Amazon, and kind of all of their European advertising business, really supporting the company and getting the most out of every euro they spend in terms of, customer acquisition and customer lifetime value and really optimizing that. And so that was, a little bit my journey into tech, into Facebook. And then at that time, a lot of my peers that I'd gone to uni with, they were all starting companies. I was lucky enough to have been exposed in my past to some fairly entrepreneurial networks, and kind of being at the right nodes in terms of having exposure to people who ended up, starting companies in vast numbers and raising venture funding. And they were kind of all starting to knock on my door because they knew I was supporting Amazon as well as other kind of growth companies across Europe and Germany in their, kind of customer acquisition and scaling on platforms like Facebook and Google. And so they were starting to call me and say, hey, can you also help us? Because we just raised venture funding and our VCs are not really happy with our performance. And they think we're way too expensive when it comes to, gaining reach or getting customers on these marketing platforms. And so I just, together with another colleague back in the day, started this Facebook venture initiative that still exists today, which is really kind of an engagement program to support venture-backed companies and, scaling more effectively on the platform, especially leveraging data and really understanding how the algorithm works, really understanding how they can influence performance. So that was kind of, how it all started. And then incidentally, we really say La Familia is a real familia. The fund actually became the first investor in my husband's company. So that was the first portfolio company in Fund 1. And so that's how then, I got connected to La Familia. They were also one of the funds that joined the initiative that I had started at Facebook. And so it was kind of on, both the private side and the kind of professional work side that suddenly I heard a lot about this fund that sounded like the Sicilian mafia, but was really, kind of a B2B focused venture fund that had just started out of Berlin. And so that's how I kind of stumbled into venture. I think I really have to put it like that. It wasn't a big master plan. I think I got incredibly lucky because it's the best job that I could ever imagine. But it was really kind of, just through the different things that I was doing and enjoying that I then got exposed and, found Jeanette and the other team members and decided to quit my job at Facebook and give this venture thing a try.
I think actually based on some of the kind of the years of experience working for the bigger tech companies, I guess it in some ways laid the path to make a move into the venture capital industry. Moving to a slightly different topic, I guess the notion and the state of entrepreneurship in Europe right now, specifically where you're based, so the DACH region, Germany, Austria, Switzerland. I think we're living in a super interesting period. We're really seeing a change and evolution in the broader kind of European ecosystem. And I think some of my own personal observations from working in Berlin, it's a great place to be. It's got a real mix of kind of raw local entrepreneurial talent. There's quite international. And I think over the last couple of decades, it's really kind of built up this thriving startup ecosystem. So we'd love to actually hear your thoughts on that evolution that you've seen and what makes you excited about the state of entrepreneurship in the region now.
So I think, I've sadly only been in Berlin for the past 6 years, which is when I started in venture. So I haven't really seen Berlin change all that much. I think I would have likely had to move here 20 years ago. I think those were the golden years of change in Berlin, both on the kind of entrepreneurial, but also the artistic and cultural side. But kind of long story short, I think, Germany has a ton of potential. Why is that? I think we've got, fantastic universities, we've got fantastic talent, and we also have a very vibrant industry, both when it comes to small companies, when it comes to mid-cap companies and larger corporations, which means that there's a lot of talent also that has unique insights into, the way that very intricate processes, very intricate also products work, right? That's what's made Germany big for the last hundreds of years is, be it mechanical engineering or anything that's really more on kind of the engineering, inventive side of things. I think that's what's made Germany strong in the past. And so a lot of this knowledge still exists within the heads of, older generations, but also within the heads of, the younger, kind of entrepreneurs and researchers that exist within Germany. I think something that is also very particular about Germany is it's very fragmented, right? It's a federalistic kind of principle. So in comparison to, for example, France, where everything happens in Paris, I think we've seen a couple of clusters emerge in Germany, right? Berlin's always kind of been the startup capital, but I would actually say that relative to other cities, Berlin has kind of plateaued a little bit, right? So if you look at, for example, what's happening in Munich, where we also opened an office, there's fantastic entrepreneurial talent, obviously, also driven by the tailwinds of the Salonuses and the Personias of the world, really some of the biggest outcomes in tech that Germany has seen. But then there's also other cities like Cologne, for example, or Frankfurt, where we have portfolio companies. If you, for example, also look at DeepL, a very recent kind of AI success and one of the few AI successes that Germany has had in the past when it comes to really big companies that's based out of Cologne, right? So you have this long tail of cities where you can also find amazing entrepreneurial talent. And so I think that's both a challenge as well as a potential for Germany. It's a challenge because it's much more difficult to connect these ecosystems, right? If you look at France, again, everyone flocks to Paris. And so it's just easier to build these densely interconnected circles of entrepreneurs that kind of raise one another's ambition, and co-pollinate the ecosystem with their ideas. In Germany, there's still kind of, much more separate ecosystems. But at the same time, I think now that the muscle is growing in different parts, we're kind of almost able to grow a bigger and wider ecosystem of talent. And so I think it might take a little bit longer to get to the same level of density as in cities like London, for example, or Berlin or Paris for, the long tail of German cities. But I do think we're well on the way there. And if I look at our portfolio and kind of how non-Berlin centric in some way it's been, of course, we're still going to invest in Berlin. This is where our main office is. This is where most of the activity in VC still happens. But really, other cities are starting to catch up. And that's something I'm just immensely proud of and just excited to see.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I have kind of observed in particular in the German ecosystem. But we recently spoke with Rana at Balderton and Chet Warner at Ada Ventures recently, and they both commented on, in their own individual worlds, kind of the flywheel effect of kind of founders backing founders from all of the big tech companies that you've mentioned there. Awesome. I think on the topic of, and you kind of touched upon it there, of kind of building and strengthening this strong ecosystem in Europe, you also serve as an advisor to the German government on various different matters relating to technology, to diversity and migration. And you've actually, I've also noticed that you've spoken very openly and candidly on a number of these topics. Could you speak to us a little bit more about what drives that and related points, what the impact of this has been?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is my personal background, right? So my father was a Nigerian immigrant, came to Germany in kind of the late 80s, early 90s, and just, built a life here. And I think contributed to Germany by basically having worked very hard ever since he came to the country, and has obviously given life to me and given me the opportunity to see the light of day, and then hopefully make my contribution in turn when it comes to supporting the German ecosystem. So I really fundamentally, just through my own experience, believe in the power of migration. I think that's one of the topics that's been really top of mind for me. If you look at the worker shortage that is millions big that we have in Europe, and how difficult it still is for startups, but also for other companies to attract talent. Of course, we have, concepts like the blue card, but, those are still fairly restrictive because they require you to have, a certain educational background. They require you to, have an exact matching, but, in between what you were doing in your country of origin and what you're doing in the country that you'd like to immigrate to. And so there's all types of barriers that I just don't think are fit for the 21st century. And so that's one of the key initiatives that I've been trying to champion, and really kind of raising the voice of seeing migration as a massive plus for, society and the world, and really kind of looking beyond the, often stereotypical images that we have of migrants that are, just trying to build a better life, even if they're not fleeing war and they're just looking for an economic opportunity. I think, there's really too much discrimination still in society, and we're not really yet realizing how dependent we're all going to be in terms of our pension ecosystem, in terms of just, people kind of, working in jobs that also, quite frankly, many Germans and Europeans no longer want to take. And so I think we just need to have a much more candid and open conversation about the types of structures, regulation, and also, attraction, like I think, advertising that we'll need to be able to get people to move here and, build their life and build their futures and build their families here. And I think another, of course, thing that's always top of mind for us as Europeans is just the broader trend of, technology, and kind of not again missing the train. I think we've missed it in the past when it comes to kind of personal computer, and we've missed it when it comes to, the age of, kind of web or cloud, at least in some parts or in many parts. We've missed it when it comes to mobile. And now we obviously are in the midst of the next shift, which is the AI shift. And so I think potentially the AI platform shift, even though no one really knows how exactly that's going to look like yet, could be one of the most transformative and powerful shifts that we have ever seen. That could, kind of diminish the potence of all the other shifts that we've seen before. And it could have many implications for the way that you get healthcare, for the way that we wage wars, for the way that you get your education, right? And so I think we're really starting to, look into the abyss of how much influence technology could have, and how, to some extent, it really also plays a role when you think about concepts like sovereignty, and when you think about concepts like, is there a bigger kind of moral, ethical codex that we want to fight for in the world, that we can only fight for if we have some type of economic influence. And Europe's been fantastic and horrible when it comes to regulation. I think you can see it from both perspectives, and that's a separate conversation. But I think there's not been enough conversation in between, kind of the innovators, in between the builders that are trying to, be at the forefront of the next technological shifts, and the regulators. And typically innovation in Europe tends to really punish the small companies, because all the big companies have the resources, they've got the lawyers, to, put structures and policies in place to deal with regulation. But it could really be the small companies and the innovation ecosystem, that kind of bears the brunt of quote unquote bad regulation. And so that's just also something that I'm quite passionate about, just trying to understand what's happening, in the space of, for example, AI regulation, or in the space of technology regulation more broadly, and just, trying to really foster an open innovation ecosystem within Europe, within, kind of the frame of, the overall ethical considerations that I think have to or should be part of every single ecosystem, and unfortunately are not in every country or every continent, which is something that we can be proud of. But still, I think the primary focus needs to be on, we need more innovation, we need less shackles for entrepreneurs to be doing what they're doing, to not fall behind once again. And then I think last but not least, it's really also just the kind of the growth capital landscape, right? I think if you look at the last 5 biggest funding rounds that happened in Germany, right? Refox, Personio, Salonis, N26, none of those were led by European investors. They were all led by, investors from the Middle East or the US. And, I'm a big fan of, I've just said it, like migration. And I think this global mindset, I think actually right now, the kind of breaking down of the global mindset, and everyone's focusing back on their nation state and nearshoring, I think that's actually very, very painful to watch, because I think we're losing a ton of potential. But at the same time, I do think it's also important to foster a more, potentially sovereign European mindset in terms of the kind of growth capital, and also, for example, kind of IPO markets that we need to be able to foster strong European companies. And I think there's just still, too big of a gap, and too many, pension funds that we do have in Germany are investing only in US investors, and not really, kind of investing in the type of growth ecosystem that I do think we need in Europe to be able to, kind of have a seat at the table, and really also, foster our national or kind of, European ecosystem. And so those are all kind of different hats that I'm wearing, and things that I'm passionate about, and trying to raise my voice on behalf of these topics.
Really well said, Judith. Your passion really, really shines through there. I think let's set up a separate episode to dive into many of those topics that you just mentioned there. But I think curious to learn more about, I guess, La Familia, the European seed and growth stage venture capital fund that you lead, a little more. Perhaps you could speak a little bit about the investment focus there and the philosophy behind the fund. And I guess, what is the key differentiator there? What makes you unique in the broader ecosystem?
So La Familia, the name might suggest that we're the Sicilian mafia. Unfortunately, we're not. We're just a plain vanilla venture fund. But really, the reason for why we're called La Familia is that we initially started out with this concept of asking what does it need in terms of access platform in Europe to connect what we would call the established industries with kind of the disruptors or the new entrants. And it was really, kind of asking the questions, what are the things that make Europe uniquely strong? And maybe it's not building the next Amazon or Facebook. Maybe it's not in the space of consumer B2C because we have a beautiful, diverse cultural ecosystem. That brings its own scaling challenges with it. But it's really focusing more on the B2B side, on the kind of strong existing industry that we have, and asking why shouldn't a company that's coming out of Europe be able to grow on the B2B side, be able to grow to the size of a Siemens or a Maersk in the future if we've been able to do that in the past. And so that's really kind of the lens through which we look at investing. We want to back the next generation of early stage founders that enable or disrupt large industries. For us, that means we are really keen on spaces like Industry 4.0, logistics, supply chain, fintech, insurance, everything that's kind of commerce enablement. So really asking, all the trends that we've seen in B2C, e-commerce, how can we bring that to the way that trade works, to the way that, kind of businesses transact? But then also spaces like, the future of work, which I think has been one that we've been very lucky to invest in early with companies like Deal, where we were the biggest Czech of the seed investor at the seed stage, or also Personio in the HR space. And so, really trying to also ask the question, how does the future of work look like? How will blue collar workers, white collar workers be able to be more productive, get more leverage in their day-to-day work? So those are all topics that we focus on. Data is another one that's really big for us, where we've made a bunch of investments. Early stage is the focus. So we just launched our third seed fund generation of 165 million euros, investing into about 40 companies across Europe and the US. And then we also have a growth fund to be able to double down on our portfolio and really kind of other exciting growth opportunities that we see in the market, and really kind of leveraging the platform. And again, coming back to La Familia, family businesses, entrepreneurs kind of from the established industry, old economy that initially were the backers of the fund. We now also have a range of fantastic institutional investors that have kind of joined our journey over time. But we've really, in terms of origin, kind of come from this idea of connecting these, kind of separate sides of the ecosystem. And, the European ecosystem is very different to the US ecosystem. We think here, a lot of companies have gotten successful in the past by, kind of just building walls and, innovating on some, amazing product that's like, really, really differentiated in terms of like 2 or 3 small mechanical details, and then get, world market leadership with that. Versus in the US, it's been a much more open ecosystem, kind of everything's kind of much more out in the open. And it's like, that's just fundamentally different business philosophies. And so there still is, and even now in 2023, there still is a mindset of, you don't get fired for hiring IBM, so why would an established industry company, sign a contract with a startup, over, 200,000, 500,000 annual contract value when the startup might not exist anymore in 2 years? And so I think it needs these kind of almost carriers of trust in the ecosystem, these like middlemen, middlewomen that, are able to kind of vouch for companies and say, no, what they're doing is amazing, and, just give it a try and then kind of grow through there. And I think we've seen that work extremely well, in the ecosystem, obviously for companies like Salonis, which is sadly not in our portfolio, but now, fantastically big. And most of their companies, most of their clients really are, these big corporations, CAC 40, DAX companies, but also on the SME side with Personio. And so I think it's really leveraging kind of this go-to-market network, as we like to call it, and helping up companies by way of warm introductions and partnerships and lots of events to be able to launch them into their respective industries.
You guys are backed by a selection of kind of world-leading entrepreneurs, and I wanted to really understand in greater detail, like, to what extent do you actually leverage that network for your portfolio companies in particular? I know that you mentioned a few different things there, but would like to learn more about that.
It really comes in different, shapes and sizes. So, for example, One thing that we do is, we host all sorts of different events throughout the year, from, smaller conference formats that are very exclusive, where we really try to bring together, leaders of the established industries, kind of CEOs of big companies, and kind of, scale up founders and art portfolio founders, and like smaller, very intimate environments, to, bigger formats. For example, last winter, we hosted the first European Tech Winter Ball. Everyone was in a ball gown and a tuxedo, and we just brought 300, individuals together from the ecosystem, VCs, a lot of founders from our portfolio, founders that we're huge fans of, as well as kind of scale up founders, from Silicon Valley, but also from Europe. And Dylan from Figma was there, had an amazing keynote speech. Obviously, having been able to sell Figma at the height of kind of the worst winter that we've seen for a long time in terms of stock market performance. And then he actually also just recently became an angel investor in one of our companies that's, that has some similarities to Figma when it comes to kind of, data and calibration and, design-led collaboration, but in the industrial space. And so this is just a small example of how we kind of, use these platforms, use these events to create this kind of cross-pollination between Silicon Valley and Europe, and between kind of, a founder from the, kind of product collaboration space to kind of the industrial intelligence space, like very, very different spaces, but we kind of see ourselves as the node in between. And there's many more examples of, kind of LPs of La Familia that, have family businesses that they're running in the background, kind of becoming the first customers of our portfolio companies, or becoming partners of portfolio companies. And oftentimes I think it's really thinking about this not from a transactional perspective. I mean, we're not some type of, kind of trade fair where you come and you meet 10 customers and afterwards you leave, and that's not how we think about relationships, and that's not how we think about building an ecosystem. We really think it's about bringing people together in certain special environments, fostering trust, fostering conversation, and then beautiful things will grow from there. Whether you find a new board member, of an established industry CEO that now sits on the board of one of our growth portfolio companies in the US that, we introduce to some of those formats, or it's a customer relationship that you win. But it's really always putting the entrepreneurs first, because we always have this saying, when you put entrepreneurs face to face, no matter if they come from the established industry or if they're, just a 20-year-old kid that's trying to do something in the DevOps world, they typically speak the same language, because there's some type of mutual understanding about kind of the forces that push them forward in the world. And that creates like a really beautiful spot to then build relationship and grow networks from. And so that's kind of the philosophy that we have at La Familia and how we think about this.
Judith, we would love to end the episode with a quick fire round. Quick answer questions, 30 seconds each. Are you ready?
100%.
So, first one, what are your top tips for founders across Europe who are fundraising right now?
Brace yourselves, be strong, be persistent. Fundraising can suck. I think it especially sucks right now. Don't lose hope, and know that many companies out there are struggling, and struggle has always been part of the startup ecosystem. It's never just been, the blue skies, green meadows, and that in the end, you're going to be fine, because the experience that you'll gain is going to be very, very important and priceless.
Great. Second question, what areas, technologies, or sectors excite you the most that other people don't really feel excited about?
I was going to say AI, but obviously that's the completely wrong answer. I think I'd have to go with upskilling. Again, coming back to this huge worker shortage, a lot of this, I think, is not actually going to be super tech focused. It's just going to be about how on earth are we going to be able to provide the talent that is missing already and is going to miss even more in the future. I just think that's a fantastic space for investing. I think we're going to see some really big companies here, but not everyone's, I think, of the same opinion.
And final question, what is the most counterintuitive thing you've learned in venture?
The thing that really stuck most with me, and I've actually learned this from one of our founders, Hannah from Personio, is how important it is not to lie to yourself. And I think the nature of venture is such that a lot of it is correlated with hype. A lot of it is correlated with 99% of the focus, and the return of a portfolio, quite frankly, is concentrated on just one or two companies, one or two entrepreneurs. And from the outside, often these stories and these journeys look incredibly glamorous and, amazing. And like the growth was just always there and the direction was always up and to the right. But the story behind what it takes to build a big company, what it takes to build a small company, no matter if you're successful or not successful, is oftentimes very hard, very ugly. And there's a lot of blunt, hard truth that is necessary to be able to, in the end, endure and succeed. And I do think that, it's a little bit almost paranoid that in venture, a lot of the stuff that we read on LinkedIn or Twitter, is all about kind of the glamorous side of, up, up, up. And I think especially during the last couple of years of the kind of, venture frenzy that we've seen, that's been a core truth. And now I think a lot of this is washing away, and kind of the core truths and the core underlying questions of like, how as an ecosystem do we not lie to each other? How as an ecosystem are we actually able to go against FOMO, go against herd mentality, and actually stick to, the one or two core truths that we believe in? I do think we've kind of, as an entire industry, lost sight of that a little bit with kind of all the hype waves that we've gone through from, kind of with the quick commerce, crypto, name the trend of the hour. And so I think coming back to this hard truth of don't lie to yourself and accepting how hard it is, right? It's very hard for us as human beings, and especially for such a tight-knit ecosystem, looking at Silicon Valley Bank, like everyone speaking to everyone and things just unraveling, or information and news breaking within minutes. I think this is something that we'll really have to kind of retrain ourselves on. And I was not expecting that when I first joined the venture ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. A great reminder to stay focused on the fundamentals. Your thesis, ignore the hype to make the best investment decisions. Judith, thank you so much for joining us as a guest on At the Cap Table. Really, really, really enjoyed the conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Great to be here.
Thank you for listening to this special episode on the European VC. If you love our show, join our community by subscribing at EU.VC. And now, some words from our beloved sponsors. Tactic is the leading forecasting and scenario planning software for venture capital funds. Tactic combines portfolio construction, portfolio management, forecasting, and reporting into a unified platform. Investors are empowered with data-driven insights on fund strategy, reserve allocation, exit planning, and fund performance. Tactic was built using quantitative techniques researched from hundreds of data-driven fund managers and is trusted by over 250 funds globally today. Tactic is a proud sponsor of the first season of the At the Cap Table podcast series. If you'd like to learn more, please check out tactic.io, tactyc.io. Investors are turning to new relationships as we continue to face challenges in a downturn. Join Expand North Star to discover Dubai, the UAE, and the rise of the Global South ecosystems. Gain insights on market access opportunities and the latest on ADGM, Mubadala, and Catalyst Partners, as well as how DFDF are transforming the global investment landscape with a $1 billion target for assets under management by the end of 2024. You'll connect with the people driving the UAE's digital economy to grow more than $140 billion in 2031. And Dubai's recently announced ambitious $8.7 trillion economy agenda for the next decade, known as D33. Register now at expandnorthstar.com/EUVC.